Right, so I'm going to do two things today. The first thing is just going to be a quick demo. The second thing is going to be a longer demo, and the second part is going to involve you doing an in-class exercise. So the first thing I'm going to show you is something called slice interval in Horos, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. The second part, which is going to take longer and is going to involve an exercise on your part, is about segmentation. And I'll explain that too when we get to that point. So first of all, slice interval. I'm going to, let's see, I better share my screen here. Right. So, as you know, in Horos, you can bring in all these different data sets, usually from CT, but also from MRI or other kinds of imaging. And CTs and MRIs consist of a series of cross-sectional slices through the body. They could be in the axial plane, which is typical for CTs. They could be in a coronal plane, sagittal plane, really any plane. And in order to reconstruct this imaging data as a 3D model, what Horos does is it takes those cross-sectional slices, stacks them up on top of one another to create a three-dimensional volume. And you can choose to view that as either a 3D volume model, which is made up of voxels, or a 3D surface model, which is a series of surfaces between pixels of different values, different gray values. Usually, when you open one of these data sets, the data itself actually keeps track of the spacing between those cross-sectional slices. In other words, were the slices taken every 1 millimeter, every 3 millimeters, every 7 millimeters? There's a certain spacing to those cross-sectional slices. And that information is usually actually embedded somewhere in the DICOM files. So every time that you've opened one of these data sets, whether it's the sample data sets that I provided to you from OSIRIX, or the visible human data sets, or anything downloaded from the Cancer Imaging Archive, that so-called slice interval, the spacing between cross-sectional slices, was already embedded within the data. And so it automatically knew exactly how to stack up the slices to reconstruct it as a 3D model. Every now and then, you're going to run into a set of data that for some reason does not actually include the slice interval embedded within the DICOM files. And it's going to ask you for the slice interval. And if you don't know how to figure out what the slice interval is, you could enter the wrong number, and your 3D model could be all squashed flat like a pancake, or it could be stretched out, elongated. The proportions will be all wrong if you don't know the correct slice interval to enter. So just so happens that the case that I worked on a couple of years ago, that I've shown you some of the images from this. This is the guy with the T5 vertebral fracture. When I received the data from the attorney and I opened it in Horos, it asked me for the slice interval because that data was not embedded within the DICOM files. So let me select one of these. This is probably should figure out a way to get rid of his name because that's privileged medical information. But yeah, I appreciate that.
It's me who got recorded.
Yeah, that's a good one. Don't look at the name. All right.
You can go back and edit.
Yeah, go and put a bunch of little black boxes over the stuff. So I've clicked on the 2D viewer and we're viewing, a series of cross-sectional slices here. And then when I go to reconstruct this as a 3D model, let's say I want to reconstruct it as a 3D volume rendering, it asks me to calibrate the data set. And it seems to know something called the pixel X and pixel Y resolution. So it knows how big the pixels are on each flat cross section. But what it's missing is the slice interval in millimeters. It's entering 0 by default, but I know that's not right because if I reconstruct this as a 3D model with a slice interval of 0, all the cross sections are just going to be stuck together in the same plane. I have to put some number in there to tell it how far these individual cross-sectional slices are spaced apart. So how the heck do I know how to do that? So I'm going to cancel that, go back to my 2D viewer, and if you look at each individual cross-sectional slice, pay attention to, I don't know if you can tell what I'm circling with the cursor, but there's a bunch of information over here. There's something about 1.25 millimeters. There's image number 45, and then there's a number above that with a negative sign in it, negative 44.38. So I'm going to just use the left and right arrows to start scrolling through the data. You'll notice that that top number changes. So negative 45.63, negative 46.25, negative 46.88, negative 47.5. That's telling me the location of each cross-sectional slice relative to some sort of starting point, some arbitrary starting point. And the difference between this number and the next number, and the next number, and the next number, that's my slicing. So what I'd have to do is just, get out my pocket calculator, get out the phone, open up a little calculator app, and figure out, okay, so we'll just ignore the negative symbol for now. So 49.38 minus 48.75. Okay, that's 0.63. I'm going to go one more. So let me go back here. So 48.75 minus 48.13. That's 0.62. So if I were to just keep scrolling through these cross-sectional slices, what I would see is that number is always either 0.62 or 0.63. So in reality, what that's telling me is that the slice interval is actually 0.625 millimeters. It just doesn't have enough decimal places to show me 0.625. So it's switching between 0.62 and 0.63. But that means that the spacing between all of these cross-sectional slices is just over half a millimeter, which is very fine resolution. So 0.625 is my number. So I'm determining that by simply scrolling through the different cross-sectional slices and looking at that number. So that's a measurement in millimeters, and the difference between each of these is my slice interval. So now I know when I go back to my 3D volume rendering, if I enter a slice interval of 0.625 millimeters and click OK,
It comes up if you have to.
yeah, right. It only asks for the slice interval. It only gives you that dialog box if it doesn't know what the slice interval is. So all of the data sets that you've used in this class so far, all the OSIRIS data sets, the cancer imaging archive data sets, they all have the slice interval stored within the DICOM file, so you don't have to tell it. It's just every now and then you get a dumb data set that doesn't have the slice interval embedded in the DICOM files. So you have to figure out what it is and then enter it manually. Yep. Now, I just used our little grayscale tool, the window level tool, to make some of this guy visible and figure out what's going on with this guy. That's the thorax. I make some things transparent. You think he's upside down. Sure enough, he's upside down. So I've rotated the model a little bit, but I haven't flipped it. He came in upside down. And I remember when I first started opening the data sets, or when I first started opening these data sets for this particular client, everything came in upside down. And at first, I didn't think much of it. I thought, okay, that's weird, but so what? Let me rotate him back into the normal position, and maybe I should use the scissor tool and get rid of some of those little pads at the back of him, because these were vertebral fractures, so I was really interested in looking at the vertebrae. So there's the vertebrae, and I can zoom in on those. And I had the radiology reports, meaning I had an actual written report where radiologists had viewed these CT images and had described the injuries. And the radiology report kept talking about fractures of the transverse processes of several of the thoracic vertebrae on the left. And I'm looking at the data and I'm seeing fractured transverse processes on the right. And there was a fracture of the lamina that was supposed to be on the right. And I'm looking at the data and it's on the left. So now I'm getting suspicious. Something weird's going on. So I opened up some of the other data sets from the same guy. He had a CT right after the motorcycle accident. He had another CT after they put the hardware in. And then I think he had some others after that later. They all came in upside down and everything was flipped backwards. Everything was on exactly the wrong side. And I finally figured it out, what I was doing wrong. And that's why what I want to share with you. Remember we looked at this number up here in the upper left? That negative sign matters. So you think, okay, spacing is just a distance, right? Why would you put spacing in as a negative distance? But apparently that actually matters. So when I said that the spacing was varying between 0.62 and 0.63 millimeters, which you split the difference, it's 0.625 millimeters. It's actually negative 0.625. So when I try to reconstruct this as a 3D model, come on, get out of the way. Okay, now it's doing that. Yes, that's why it's upside down. So I may have to close all of this. I may have to even relaunch Horos, because now it thinks it knows the slice interval if I put it in. So let's see if I actually have to quit Horos or not. Okay, let's try this now. Volume rendering. Okay, we're back here. So I actually have to put in negative 0.625 millimeters. Click OK. And he comes in right side up. And more importantly, all of the fractures are on the correct side. So I had to kind of learn that the hard way. Thankfully, I didn't draw anything, and because I knew right away something was wrong, something wasn't making sense. So it flips it upside down, but it actually makes it a mirror image.
So the heart was on this.
So the heart would have been on the right. Okay. And if I had actually visualized it in such a way to see something like the aorta, then I would have known for sure, okay, this is just dead wrong. I mean, my first instinct when I'm seeing fractures on the right and the radiology report says on the left, I'm thinking that the radiologist just screwed up.
Yeah.
Which they do. They do stuff like that. They flip left and right. Surgeons do that all the time. They'll write an operative report and they say, yeah, we removed the left kidney. It's like, no, you removed the right kidney.
That's so.
Yeah, that's why if you ever go for surgery on something that has bilateral parts, like knees, elbows, shoulders, a good surgeon will write in big letters, not this one. My wife had arthroscopic surgery on one of her knees, and I think it was her right knee she had the surgery on. The left one, they wrote in big letters, not this one, with a Sharpie. All right, so I don't know what the chances are that you'll ever remember that. I don't know how likely it is that you're going to use Horos. You know, it may be 10 years before you ever come across a data set that doesn't have the slice interval in it. But maybe, just maybe, if you ever run into this, some little spark in the back of your brain saying, wait a minute, I remember Jim said something about things coming in upside down and flipped mirror image. All right. So that is just for your information. The other thing I want to do today, which is going to take up most of our time, and you'll have an exercise that I want you to do, is what's called segmentation. And I don't know, were you introduced to this? I know you said that you guys use Slicer a little bit with Glenn, right?
Just like a.
Yeah, I mean, that's all we're going to do here. We're going to do a real brief thing. Some people really take segmentation to a very high level. I'll be honest, since I don't do 3D myself, I never use this except once a year when I give this demo. So forgive me if I screw something up, because it's not second nature the way like Illustrator or Photoshop would be. But I'll do my best. So just to refresh your memory, if you were exposed to it before, or if maybe you didn't happen to be in that class or whatever. Segmentation is where you identify a particular structure that's visible on the cross-sectional slices in one of these data sets. And you isolate that structure from everything else. And you're then able to export a 3D model of just that structure. So it could be just one bone, just one organ, something like that, that you basically trace on the cross-sectional slices. And then you're able to then visualize that as a 3D model where you can see only that one structure that you've isolated from everything else. The basic approach to segmentation, at least in Horos, is that you're going to view the two-dimensional cross-sectional images. You're going to locate the structure that you're interested in, a kidney, a vertebra, the lungs, colon, whatever you want to try to isolate from the other anatomy. You're going to trace that on every single slice in the data set. And you're then going to take all of the pixels that lie inside the selected area, inside the traced area, turn them to white. And I'll show you how to do that. You convert all those pixels inside the selected area white. And then all of the pixels outside the selected area, you're going to turn them black. So you're creating a very high contrast image where the thing that you want is white and everything else is black. And when you reconstruct that as a surface model, Horos will very easily be able to recognize that sharp boundary between white pixels and black pixels and generate a surface model, which you can then export in a 3D file format to bring into your favorite 3D software for further rendering or animation or whatever you want to do with it. So I'm going to use the mechanics data set. You're free to use any data set you want. I'm going to use this one only because I practiced on it. And I have to give myself a little refresher every time I do this every year, because otherwise I will forget how it works. So in the mechanics data set, there's one subset or one study called angio-aorte. It's the aorta in French. And this one happens to have 743 images, so it's a very high resolution image. I'm going to go to the 2D viewer. And there are 3 different techniques for creating a segmentation in Horos. They all involve creating something called a region of interest, or a group of regions of interest, ROIs, or some people just call them ROIs, because it's ROI. And the region of interest is basically the structure that you're tracing. And you're going to trace it on all of the cross-sectional slices. And then, like I say, you'll then select the inside of all of those ROIs, turn the pixels white, select the outside of the ROIs, turn the pixels black, and then you can reconstruct it as a surface model. So, like I said, there are 3 different ways to do this, 3 different methods. And I'm going to show you all 3. The first one is slow and clunky, and you probably won't use it, but I want to show it to you because it is something that is available within Horos. The 3 methods get progressively better as I show them to you, although some of them do have limitations that make them difficult to use. So the first method utilizes a menu up here. There's a little triangle here showing that we can open up this submenu, and things like open polygon, close polygon, pencil, brush, these are all tools that allow you to define a region of interest, an ROI. And for this first technique, I'm going to show you how to do it with just a paintbrush. When I select the paintbrush tool, I get a little brush tool palette that pops up on screen, and it allows me to set the size of the brush, the diameter of the brush. I don't know if that's the diameter in pixels or just like some random number that doesn't really relate to anything. But you'll be able to tell right away if you've got a brush that's too big or too small. What I want to do is I want to find some anatomic structure in here, and I want to start basically painting it on every cross-sectional slice. And I'm going to actually, with this brush approach, you have to paint it on every single slice that object appears on. So I've tried using this to just paint a single thoracic vertebra, which thankfully doesn't appear on a whole lot of slices because each vertebra is not that big. The problem with trying to do a thoracic vertebra, and I know anatomy pretty well, and I know cross-sectional anatomy pretty well, but man, trying to actually figure out which part belongs to which vertebra is really hard because they overlap a lot. I mean, the spinous process in the thoracic vertebra like extends at least 1 vertebral level below the vertebra itself. There's a lot of overlap. So I'm actually going to try something different. I just noticed the aortic arch. Maybe we can do the aortic arch. Maybe that won't be so bad. So here it is just coming into view. So I'm going to take that brush tool and start painting, and I'll find out in a minute just how big this brush is. I could probably actually increase the size of this brush a little. Up to 3, try that. So I've painted a little bit on this one slice. I'm going to use the arrow keys and move to the next slice. Paint a little more. Next slice, paint a little more. So I'm doing this on every single slice. you might notice as soon as I'm finished painting an area, it comes up with a little box over here. That's just giving me information, like it actually tells me the cross-sectional area in square centimeters of the area that I just painted. I mean, I don't think that's all that useful. I suppose if you were a physician, there might be some reason to want to know the cross-sectional area of the aortic arch at a certain point. Being a little sloppy just because I'm trying to do this quickly for the sake of the demo. This is my first time trying the aorta. I was actually going to try to demonstrate a thoracic vertebra to you, but I know how awful it comes out most of the times that I've tried it. So I made a last minute executive decision here to try something different. You can, I'll show you this in a minute, but you can actually save these ROIs, these regions of interest. And then all you have to do is reopen that data set, open the 2D viewer like I'm doing now, and then you can load the region of interest. So you can save it as a file, and then you can reload it to open it. And I actually have some that are saved just to speed it up. But like I said, I haven't done the aortic arch before, so this is my first time doing this one. Yeah, the one thing that's a real pain with this brush tool is that you have to literally do this on every single slice. And if it was something really big, like let's say I wanted to do those lungs, I mean, that's going to extend most of the length of the data set. So it's going to be most of those 741 images, which is kind of insane. In the interest of time, I'm going to not do the whole arch. But I'd kind of like to at least get to the point where you can actually differentiate the ascending aorta from the descending aorta. So after it arches, to be able to see, you know, the ascending part going up into the arch and the descending part coming down into the arch. Even to get to the point where the ascending and descending are separate, that's going to take me a few minutes, so bear with me. You might notice it's making a couple of different little splotches there. Sometimes if you pick the mouse up, or I'm using the Wacom tablet, sometimes if you pick it up and start painting again, it's actually giving me multiple regions of interest on this one slice. That's not an issue. That's not gonna be a problem, because what I'm gonna do before I actually select the pixels and change the color of the pixels is I'm just gonna say, select all of the regions of interest in the entire data set. And so it's gonna select all of them, even if there are multiple ROIs on one slice, it's gonna select them all. So like if I accidentally, if I pick the cursor up and start painting again, it's actually giving me a new region of interest. One thing I've discovered is if I do pick the cursor up or the pen, as long as I click on one of the existing ROIs and then continue to paint, it'll add to that existing ROI. But I've still got two on this one slice, but again, that shouldn't be an issue. We're getting closer. You can see the aorta arch is starting to pinch in a little bit in the middle, almost like a sort of a figure eight shape. So it's ascending and descending are starting to separate from one another. Just another couple minutes. And then I'll be able to show you the next steps in the process. Just about separated here. Yeah, my Zoom recording, I can take this into video editing software and speed up this part. Yeah. For this, for something like this aortic arch, I would probably use the second method I'm going to show you. So yeah, honestly, I don't know why or under what circumstances this would be the preferred method of doing it. Since I don't do a lot of segmentation myself, I haven't come across a situation where be like, oh yeah, you got to use this paintbrush tool in this particular situation. I don't know that. All right, so we've definitely got a separate ascending and descending part of the aorta here. So I can go back up. There's a whole menu. There's a whole ROI menu. And in this menu, I can do things like select all ROIs in this series. So that will select all of them on every, even if there's multiple ones on a certain slice, like here, it's selected all of the ROIs in this whole data set. And then since I've selected them all, I can save the selected ROIs, or there's a command to just save all ROIs of this series. So, I mean, the fact that I selected them all, if I save selected or save all ROIs, it's going to do the same thing. But I can actually save this to a file. I think it's an XML file. I forget exactly what the file type is, but so I could save that, all of the ROIs in the series. Okay. As I said, I selected all of the ROIs in this series. And then down near the very bottom of the ROI menu is the option to set pixel values to. And that brings up a dialog box. And this is where I'm going to change the color of individual pixels. And there's different ways to do this, but what I found works pretty well is to take all of the ROIs or all of the pixels that are inside the regions of interest and make them white. And take all the pixels that are outside the regions of interest and make them black. That's going to create a real hard interface between solid black and solid white pixels. So I'm going to say apply this to all ROIs because I want to make sure that I'm coloring the inside of all of those regions of interest a certain color and everything outside those regions of interest a certain color. So I want to make sure to select all, apply to all ROIs. Then I'm going to say set the pixels that are inside the ROIs. A note about pixel values in Horos. It uses kind of an obscure numbering system to define the value of any pixel. There's a certain number that corresponds to each shade of gray in the image. The important ones to remember are that negative 3071 is solid black. Positive 3071 is pure white. So there's a range of pixel values from negative 3071 to positive 3071, solid black to solid white. So I want to say if a current pixel has a value larger than, I want to actually put in negative 3071. So in other words, if there's a pixel inside the region of interest that is any other color besides solid black, I'm going to change it to this new value of, and if it's less than positive 3071, so if it's lighter than solid black and darker than solid white, so in other words, basically every single pixel that falls inside the region of interest, I'm going to change it to 3071, which is white. So it's kind of a convoluted way. I wish there was a simple way of just saying, make all the pixels inside the regions of interest white. You have to do this kind of weird stuff with numbers. But so basically take the entire range of pixels from solid black to solid white within the regions of interest and make them pure white, which is 3071. So hopefully when I click OK, kind of hard to tell because everything inside the aortic arch was already pretty white anyway. But now I'm going to go back to that same command, go to the regions of interest menu, set pixel values to, make sure I'm applying this to all of the ROIs. Now I'm going to say, take the pixels that fall outside of those ROIs. And once again, regardless of what the pixel value is, if it's bigger than negative 3071, and if it's smaller than positive 3071, we're going to make it black. We're going to say change all the pixels to following value. We're going to say negative 3071, which is pure black. It's the minimum possible number. So again, cross your fingers. So now everything inside of all my ROIs is white. Everything outside is black. Hopefully that's white. It should be. So now I'm going to go to my 2D, 3D window, and I'm actually going to create a 3D surface rendering. And 3D surface rendering, I'm choosing that for two reasons. Because I've created solid black and white pixels, Horos is going to be able to find that boundary really easily and create a surface at that boundary between black and white pixels. The other reason I'm saying use a surface model is because that's the only kind of model that you can export out of Horos in 3D format. So just like I do when I create any surface model, I need to choose a predefined value. I'm going to choose predefined value of skin. The reason being, it's going to see the boundary between the solid black pixels on the outside, which is just like the hair, and then the white pixels inside the regions of interest, which is going to interpret as, an object. And it really doesn't make any difference what color I choose, because I'm going to export it to 3D and recolor it anyway. I don't know, maybe I'll give it a color, just what the heck. What was that, aorta? Let's make it red. Okay. And there it is. Doesn't look like much because I didn't do a whole lot of all that for that.
That's why I said it. They're actually
And I have a feeling it did not select some of my ROIs, maybe the ones that I screwed up and put multiple ROIs on there, because notice there's a little slice missing. That's user error, apparently. Although not sure why it would do that, because if you select all of the regions of interest and color the interior white, it should have colored them all. Even if I had 17 ROIs all on one layer, I'm selecting them all, applying it to all the ROIs, so it should have worked. But yeah, all that for this. So if I really wanted to, I could go to, there's a button in here to export 3D SR, and you could export this as a wavefront OBJ file if you wanted to bring it into Maya. We're going to actually use something different. I'm going to suggest you export as an STL. STL is short for stereolithography. It's the standard file format that's used for 3D printers. I mean, we're not going to 3D print these, but I know it's a universal 3D format that you can bring into Maya, Cinema 4D, MeshLab, whatever. So I can export this ugly thing as an STL file. We're going to give it an appropriate name. Ugly aorta. It's going to export that as ugly aorta.stl. All right, so that's one way of making segmentation in Horos, is the tedious, painstaking, paint everything with a paintbrush technique. So I'm going to close my 3D surface model now. Before I close my 2D viewer, if I simply show you the second method, what it's going to do is it's going to create a whole bunch of ROIs in addition to the ones I've already created, and it's going to cause all kind of weird stuff to happen. So I want to delete all ROIs in this series before I move on to do something else. I mean, if I ever wanted that really ugly aortic arch back, I did save it to my desktop, so I could still reopen it. But just to make sure that I don't end up with competing ROIs from different parts of the demo, I want to make sure to delete all of these. And so they're all gone. I'm going to close my 2D window. And now I'm going to show you the second method, which is a little less tedious. Still pretty tedious, but not quite as tedious. So I'm going to once again select that same data set. So mechanics, angio aort, the one with 743 pixels. And since I closed my 2D viewer, the pixels have gone back to being, all different shades of gray. It didn't remember the fact that I changed some of them to pure black and some to pure white. Click on my 2D viewer again. And now I'm going to actually try something that works a little better. Oh, shoot. You're supposed to delete all ROIs in this series. Huh. All right, well, it's a good thing I double checked because there was at least one ROI that didn't get deleted. So I just deleted that one. So hopefully that one's done. I'm going to do a kidney. And this data set includes most of the thorax, but also the upper part of the abdomen. So we're down into the liver now. And you can start to see the spleen over here. Remember, everything's flipped. Left is on the right. So that's spleen. And just below the spleen is the beginning of the kidney. And I'll just scroll through and you can confirm this really is kidney down here. So I'm going to go back so we can just barely start to see the kidney coming into view. I'm going to go back to this tool menu here. And I'm going to choose the closed polygon tool. Yeah.
Then didn't last year you told us that, not last year, this process.
Yep.
That we're doing.
Yep. It's oriented as if you were standing at the feet looking up. So, or you can simply think of it as if you were facing the patient, their left is going to be on your right.
Yeah.
So that's why the spleen appears on the right side of the image, but that's the patient's left. And they're lying on their back. So this really is as if we were looking up at the cut section from the feet.
I see.
All right, so I picked my closed polygon tool. And I really wish that this worked like the pen tool in Illustrator, but it doesn't. It's kind of like the pen tool in Illustrator, but not really. You create a series of anchor points, just like you do in Illustrator, but there are no handlebars. So what we're going to do is we're just going to play connect the dots, draw little dots all the way around the kidney, and it's going to guess the curvature just based on where the dots are located. So you can't drag anything out to create the little control bars like you do in Illustrator. So we're just barely seeing part of the kidney here. So I'm just going to click a few little dots, closed polygon. And now here's one of the weird things about the closed polygon tool. Maybe I should try the open polygon sometime, but you would think with closed polygon that, like with Illustrator, what you want to do to enclose a shape is come all the way back around to the beginning, click on the starting point. Don't do that. Go all the way around the object you're trying to trace and get pretty close to the beginning, but don't click back on the beginning point. And I'll show you why. It may be hard to see on this one. Tell you what, I'm just gonna draw some big random thing here, just so you can see this better. So I'm drawing a series of straight segments. I'm just clicking, and it's kind of guessing the curvature for me. And I come up here and the temptation is to come back to the starting point and click. And it looks fine right now, except if I scroll ahead a few slices and then come back to it, look what it did. It put a weird little kink in the line. So you actually have to resist that temptation to click on the starting point. Just click, 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 get pretty close, leave a gap. And apparently what the close polygon tool does is it automatically closes it for you without you having to click. So if I scroll forward a few slices and scroll back, it actually closed it. So kind of weird, but I find, it took me a while to figure this out too. I kept making things that had those little squiggles in them and couldn't figure out why. All right, so I'm going to delete that and go back to the little teeny tip of my kidney here. Click some dots. Get pretty close to the starting point, but don't click back on the starting point. And now here's one big advantage to using these polygon tools. You don't have to do it on every slice. You can probably get away with every 5th or 6th slice. So I'm going to jump ahead 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe. Click, click, click all the way around. Well, not all the way, but pretty close. Get pretty close. Don't click on the starting point again. Then jump ahead 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pretty close, but don't touch the starting point again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah.
Why do you do this one, 5 or 6? That's whatever. If you're still doing the same process, like simple.
There's a command I'm going to show you in a minute to generate the missing ROIs.
Yeah.
And it seems to only be able to do that with polygons.
Oh.
Doesn't seem to be able to do it just painting with pixels. Yep. So there is another tool in here. There's a point tool you can click on, and that will let you grab a point and move it around. Even without using that, right? Yeah, since you don't have a ton of control over where the curves are, you kind of want to go back to, whoops, okay, see, don't do that. Sometimes you do have to tweak them a little bit because they don't go right where you want them to. It's like most things, with a little more practice, you kind of start to understand where it's going to draw the curves. So you can put the points in the right places to get the kind of curve you want. But it's not super intuitive like that. And it's not very intuitive. At some point, we're going to start to see the hilum of the kidney, the point where the renal arteries and veins are entering and where the renal pelvis is located. So that's going to create an indent on the kidney, which we're just starting to see. So that's like right here, it's starting to indent a little bit. And now you can see that the hilum is really indented. So we're going to go way inside into this deep space inside the kidney and really need to, adjust these points quite a bit. Those got really kind of weird. There's got to be a way to hide this silly thing. Sorry, I gotta wait a second because the Zoom bar got in my way of my menu. Here we go.
Similar to the last thing that you're just drawing the pencil. So
Pretty much, yeah. There is going to be one difference in just a minute that it's going to allow me to fill in the missing ROIs. So I'm skipping over, like only doing like every fifth slice, it'll actually generate the missing ones. So there's quite a deep indent here at the hilum. And that's where your renal pelvis and your renal arteries and veins are located. Being a little sloppy just in the interest of time. Right. I'm actually going to stop here because I've already drawn this and I'm going to just import it, just again, in the interest of time. But before I do that, I'm going to show you the next step is we're going to go to the ROI menu. We're going to select all ROIs in the series. There is another command here called ROI rename, which will let us take all of the selected ROIs in this series and give them a name. So we're going to say all ROIs in this series, and I'm going to give them a name, like let's call them kidney 2 because I've already got one called kidney. So what I'm doing is I've selected all of the ROIs. And I'm now renaming all of the ROIs in this series as kidney 2. And actually, I'm going to Okay, so what I've done so far is I've drawn a bunch of these closed polygons around about every fifth or sixth slice of the kidney, and I didn't completely finish because I do have one of these already saved. But let's see. And so I selected all of the ROIs in this series, and I renamed them all. What's that? ROI rename. I renamed them all as kidney 2. At this point, if I wanted to, I could save all of the ROIs in this series, which are all now renamed kidney 2. So I could call this, kidney 2 or something like that. And save that, and then I could reopen it at any point I wanted to later. But one of the most important things is let's see, where's the command? Oh, okay. Under the ROI menu, there's a submenu called ROI volume. And I'm going to choose this command to generate missing ROIs. What that's going to do is it's going to generate closed polygons for all of those slices that I skipped over. So it's going to look at the ones that I drew, and it's going to draw intermediate shapes between them. So I click generate missing ROIs. And now, as I scroll through with my arrow keys, I should see that there's a curve on every single slice. And it actually did a reasonably good job. It kind of missed the hilum here a little bit. Not really surprising. But I could go on any of these, and I could take my, if I can get the zoom thing to go away. I could actually use my point tool on any of these and, move points around if I wanted to. So I can edit on all of those new ROIs that were just generated. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to delete these and reopen one that I had saved previously, where I actually did the whole kidney. So I'm actually going to delete all of the ROIs in this series. And let's just make sure it really deleted them all this time. Last time it kind of mysteriously left one. All right, so it seems to have deleted all the ROIs. I'm going to now import ROIs from one that I had saved previously. I actually had a kidney one. I'm going to open that. Thought I was going to open that. Where is it? Let me try closing this 2D viewer, then reopen it again. And import eyes. Scrolling down to where the kidney should be. And hopefully the ROI that I just imported will show up. There it is. Okay, so it's showing up. Apparently I had not generated the missing ones yet. Why is there a kidney on the other side? Huh. All right. So it kept the kidney, but it also kept kidney 2. That's weird. That is very strange. All right, so once again, I just tried deleting them. Let's see what happens when I load the ones that I want here. All right, so apparently I did the other kidney. All right, now it's working. All right, so I just imported regions of interest for what would actually be the right kidney. Now I'm going to select them all. Select all Roys in this series. And I'm going to do that same thing where we set the pixel values. So all regions of interest. Inside the ROIs, we want to take the full range of values, everything from negative 3071 up to positive 3071. So basically all of the pixels inside the regions of interest, we're going to set those to 3071, which is pure white. And it did, and it worked. Now we're going to do the same thing, set pixel values to all ROIs outside the ROIs. Again, that same range from negative 3071, positive 3071. We're going to set all of the outside pixel values to negative 3071, which is pure black. Click OK. That seems to have worked. Now we're going to view this as a 3D surface rendering. We're going to just choose skin as our predefined value. I'm going to give it some kind of color. And there it is. And that kind of looks like a kidney, sort of. And you can even see the deep hilum, where the renal artery and vein would be going in. So we can save that as an STL file. Desktop, click save. And I'm going to close that model. I'm going to delete all of the ROIs in the series because now I'm going to show you the third method for creating a region of interest. And I want to make sure I delete all of the existing ROIs. Hopefully they're all gone. Kind of looks like they are. I'm going to close the 2D viewer. And now one last time, I'm going to reopen the mechanics angio aorta data set. Click on the 2D viewer. I'm just going to scroll way down to where the kidneys are just to make extra sure that it didn't accidentally keep some regions of interest from before. Because sometimes the software just seems kind of finicky and doesn't cooperate. So let's just make sure there are no regions of interest for those kidneys. So far, so good. All right, good. All right, so now I'm going to go back to here where the lungs are visible. And I'm going to show you the coolest way to create an ROI. But the downside to this last method, it's super fast and kind of automated, but it only works with objects that have a really high contrast. from their neighbors. So I'm going to use this to create a region of interest of the lungs, because the lungs are solid black and they're surrounded by a lot of other tissues that are white and gray. So it's going to be relatively easy for me to segment the lungs out from their surroundings and do it in a way that's basically automated. All right, so under the ROI menu, down near the very bottom is an option that's called Grow Region 2D, 3D segmentation. That brings up this little window with segmentation parameters. And I want to make sure that I select 3D growing region entire series. So we don't want the 2D growing region, which is only on the current image. We want to make sure it's 3D growing region entire series, which appears to be the default. I want to make sure that the algorithm right below that is set to threshold interval, which also appears to be the default setting. So assuming that 3D growing region is selected and assuming that algorithm is set to threshold interval, you shouldn't have to change anything. Now, all I have to do is click on some object in my two-dimensional image here, something that has high contrast like the lungs. So I'm just going to click with the cursor in this blank space, this black area. And I kind of need it to get both lungs. So normally it gets both lungs right off the bat. I'm going to see if I just click the other. No, it's going back and forth. Huh. So I literally just click with the cursor. Oh, yeah, under the ROI menu, Grow Region 2D, 3D segmentation.
ROI.
This is making a whole new one, so I had to make sure that I deleted all the old ones. Let me close that. Let me see. Okay, maybe if I click on one of these, I mean, the lungs are supposed to be completely separate, right? They are separated by a pleura, so they shouldn't be joined. But I just know when I've done this on my own a couple of times, it always seems to get both lungs right off the bat. So I kind of need, maybe I need one of these where it looks like they're touching. It looks like they're continuous. So let's try that again. We go Grow Region 2D, 3D segmentation. Make sure it's set to 3D growing region, threshold interval, and just click in the image. Huh. Interesting. Well, I don't know why it's working differently now than when it did and the way it worked at home over the weekend. I do know that you can play around with something called the interval setting. There's a little slider here. Notice that it's getting the lung, but it's not picking up like all of the bronchi and pulmonary arteries and veins and things. I know playing around with the oh, now it's getting the other one. All right, maybe I just have to set the interval level higher, and then it seems to recognize that the other lung belongs with this one. If I set the interval really low, notice that the lower I set the interval setting, the more stuff that it's missing inside the lungs. The higher I set it, the more it's actually getting the bronchi and pulmonary arteries and veins and things, although it's still leaving some of those blank. A little bit, yeah. It's very much like the threshold setting on the magic wand tool in Photoshop. All right. Now, down at the bottom, I want to just make sure that I've got everything set right. I want to click the compute button. And this is where the magic happens, hopefully. What it should do is now it should recognize all of the other areas on all of the other cross-sectional slices that have that same pixel value, that same black. So if I click compute, now if I scroll through, hopefully, yep, you notice that it's automatically detected the lungs on every level. It's even detecting the trachea and the bronchi splitting in the middle. So super fast, just the only downside is it has to be something with high contrast. Probably would have worked pretty well on that aorta that I did for the very first demo. So now that I can tell that it's propagated the selection, the region of interest to all of the other slices, all of the other levels, I could close that other window. Now you might notice down on these slices, if you look at the right lung, which is on our left-hand side, there's some defects over here. That's actually a tumor in the right lung. And so as a result, it has a different gray value than the rest of the lung because it's more dense than the rest of the lung. So if I were to export this as a 3D model, it would actually have a big defect in the right lung where that tumor is located. I'm going to go ahead and do that because I don't think that's a big deal. It's actually going to look kind of interesting. But if I really wanted to make sure that I was exporting a 3D model of healthy lungs without a tumor, I could actually go to my paintbrush tool and paint over that defect. I'm going to see if I can undo that though. You'd have to do it on every slice. Every slice where the defect appears, you'd have to paint it over. So I'm not going to bother doing that for the sake of the demo. What I want to do now is the same thing we've done with all of the other ones, is we want to change pixel values. We want to make the pixels inside the selected area all white, make the ones outside all black. So we go to ROI menu, set pixel values to, make sure we choose all ROIs. Inside, we want to go from negative 3071 to positive 3071, and we're going to change those to positive 3071, which is pure white. And then the opposite of that, set pixel values to, again, make sure we choose all ROIs. Set the pixels that are outside the ROIs, the full range from negative 3071 to positive 3071, but we're going to make these negative 3071, which is pure black. Now, I go to my 2D, 3D menu, make a 3D surface rendering. Once again, we're going to choose skin, give it a kind of a lung color. And I've got a 3D model of the lungs. And if you look up inside, you can even see the trachea and the bronchi. And if I look at the cut section up here, you can see the branching of the bronchi and the pulmonary arteries and veins as well, internally. So it's captured the outer surface of the lungs but it's also captured the inner surface of the trachea, the bronchi, and even all of the, the little bronchi in the lungs. So this we can export as a 3D model in STL format. We're going to call that lungs. Close the 3D reconstruction. It doesn't really matter if I delete all the ROIs in the series because I'm going to quit Horos anyway, and it's going to forget them anyway. I mean, I could save these if I really wanted to. I could save this ROI. I'm just going to hit delete, close the 2D window, and I'm going to quit Horos. So I should have 3 STL files on my desktop. I've got that really ugly aortic arch thing that I created at the beginning. I've got the kidney one that I created using closed polygons. And I've got the lungs that I just did just now. So what I want you to actually do to hand in today is I want you to play around with these different methods of creating ROIs. We don't have a ton of time left. If everybody wants to just jump to the lungs because they're so cool, that's fine. But I want you to actually render one of these 3D models. We're going to just do a real quick and dirty render. We're not going to get involved with Maya or Cinema 4D or anything like that. We're actually going to use a program called MeshLab. I mean, I kind of want people to play with them just to see what they do. But you can then pick whichever one you want. No, you don't have to do 3 different renders if that's what you're asking. You're just gonna pick one to render it. Okay, sure, whatever. All right, so this is MeshLab, which is actually a wonderful tool for cleaning up really hideous meshes that have, bad polygons and all kinds of stuff. We're going to use it right now just as a way of doing a really quick and dirty render of these models. Plus, we can actually smooth them out a little bit. That's one downside to the segmentation process, is that it oftentimes retains kind of a stair-step appearance because of the stack of slices. So you can actually get rid of some of that here in MeshLab. So I'm going to go to the file menu. I'm going to say import mesh. Go to my desktop. And I'm not going to bother with the ugly aorta. Let me open the kidney one. You can usually just select the defaults. And if I want to rotate this kidney around, what I want to do is see this big A up in the toolbar up at the top. There's a little thing that looks, I don't know, like a bunch of axes, sort of like a little globe just to the left of the big A. Click on that, and then it lets you rotate this thing around in 3D space. And you see what I mean about the stair stepping? You get all these kind of ridges on here. It's not a nice smooth mesh because it was still stacking a bunch of 2-dimensional slices to create this. I can smooth that out a little bit. In MeshLab, I have a whole big filters menu. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the whole kidney. I'm going to go to the selection submenu and choose the command select all. There's a couple different ways to select all, but this one works. And I want to select all of the faces and all of the vertices. Apply, and it turns pink. So that tells me that it's selected the whole thing. And then there are actually a bunch of smoothing options under the filters. And I haven't played with all of these. I mean, these are all just different mathematical algorithms for smoothing out the surface of a mesh. But I did find one that seems to work pretty well. It's called Taubin Smooth, Taubin. You got to make sure that the object is selected first, but then you choose this Taubin Smooth filter. And I had pretty good luck with just applying the defaults. And it's not perfect, but it did get rid of some of that stair stepping a little bit, smoothed it out a little bit. I could probably go in and try playing around with the individual settings in that Taubin smoothing option, but it would all be trial and error. I don't know exactly what all those different settings really do. I'm going to deselect now, and there's different ways to deselect, but you can go back under the filters menu to selection and say select none and apply. And that just makes it so it's not pink anymore. And now we can render it. There's a render menu. We're just going to choose one of these shaders. One of the really basic ones that you may have learned about in Maya is a Phong shader. Nope, okay. So with the Phong shader, you can just play around with things like the shininess of the shading. There's some fun ones up here. I don't know what the kidney is going to look like, but there's one called an X-ray shader. Isn't that fun? Try that with the lungs. I'll open the lungs up in a minute. I'm just going to stick with your basic Phong. And then to export an image from this, you just go to the file menu and just save snapshot. And you do have to click, it's kind of weird. You have to click on this little period over here. Come on. To be able to choose the correct folder. Now it assumed that I want to put it on the desktop since that's where the mesh came from. So we'll just put it there and then save. And if I hide Mesh Lab, we'll see it should have created a ping file. You can change the background if you want. I'll show you that in a second. So let me go back into Mesh Lab. I'm going to go ahead and close this one. I'm not going to bother saving it as a Mesh Lab file. All I wanted to do was just export a ping file, an image. Close, oh, sorry. So now I'm going to open a different mesh, go to File, Import Mesh, grab the lungs. That just use the defaults. Click on my little 3D globe thing here, and I can rotate this around and look up here if I want to see the trachea. I can use the scroll wheel to, zoom in and out, the little scroll wheel on the mouse. Now, this is one where you really see that stair step appearance pretty noticeably. So this is one that definitely benefits from some smoothing. So once again, I'm going to go to Filters, Selection, select all. Then Filters, Smoothing. Try that Taubin Smooth again. Apply the defaults. It smooths it out pretty good. Gets rid of some of the stair stepping. And then deselect. And then play around with your render shaders again. Here's your basic Phong shader. Here's the X-ray. Yeah, I think that's really fun with the lungs with the X-ray shader, because you see all those bronchi inside. So I could save that as a snapshot, and it's actually when you say save snapshot that you can indicate the background. First, I gotta choose the folder where it's gonna go, choose the desktop folder. And then for the background, I can just, I can use that gradient, or I can say like solid white or solid black. Let's try solid black because that might look kind of fun with the X-ray render. Let's see what that looks like. Pretty cool. So there's already a Dropbox up in my courses for segmentation. So just, try the different segmentation options. Pick one that you like. Export an STL, save it as or view it as a 3D surface model. Export the STL. Bring it into MeshLab. Smooth it if you want. And just save a thing. PNG file.